Hello, everyone. So I'm taking a little break from Lone Wolf Fist, Acid and Steel, and I'm working on Parliament of Crocodiles. This is one I'm only co-authoring. I designed and then abandoned this project like almost a decade ago, and it was in a pretty close state to being playtestable, and I just stopped. It wasn't working for me on some level. I didn't like it. So this was a point in my design when I had a lot of conflicting ideas, and I was reaching pretty widely for things that inspired me. And so I pitched it among a few other things to my co-author, and this is the one that they got excited about. So they've been doing a lot of work and writing on it, using a lot of my old writing from my old stuff. Ugh, excuse me. Oh gosh, and yeah, so it's inspired me to take another fresh look at it with the knowledge I've gained in the intervening decade. And I gotta say, I'm actually I'm really enjoying going back to working on it again. So let me make myself a little smaller here, and so guys can kind of see this a little bit. So let's scoot this. So I I've been working on the core resolution system, and they've been working on like the higher tier stuff, and we're gonna kind of meet in the middle with it. Um, so as you can see, this is sort of an early draft. My initial idea was to combine the bid system and the sort of diceless bidding system for the four attributes from Ember Diceless Role Playing, which is this part right here. And this is my take. This is kind of a version of their stats, just sort of filtered a little bit through my thinking that I used for the early design of the of Parliament of Crocodiles. So you've only got four core stats, so that kind of streamlines it a little bit. And down here, I've got a brief list of skills and their pairing with the attributes. And this is the kind of part where it's a little World of Darknessy. Like, so vampire players will be like, oh, okay, I see. So these are your skills and this is your attribute. And that's pretty much how this works out. Um, and I've gone through a couple of layers here, and I've had some interesting thinking on each layer. So initially, I was just gonna make this diceless, and then I kind of realized I don't want it to be diceless. There's a lot of drama that you sacrifice when you can't roll dice anymore. So I was just like, okay, let's not do that. Let's make sure we can roll dice. And then I had to kind of backwards engineer, like, well, how am I gonna make the dice work with this? Like, what are the dice? Where do they come from? What do they do? And thankfully, Lone Wolf Fist, what has worked consistently in Lone Wolf Fist still works, and the ideas behind it work really well too. So I kind of backwards engineered the die pool from World of Darkness, and I wanted to kind of talk about it for a minute, and then I want to talk about what I'm doing now. So the die pool from World of Darkness is an interesting contrast to like the classic like D20 roll of Dungeons and Dragons, and the reason is like whenever you're rolling the d20, what you're actually consulting there isn't the character's skill, because the skills are on the character sheet somewhere, right? In older editions they're in your attributes, and in newer editions like the third edition and past, really even a lot in second edition too, you have like skill ranks, and that's like your floor for skills. And so when you roll the die, you only do it in scenarios. And again, third edition makes this very explicit, but you only roll the die in scenarios in which there is peril and a large chance of a failure, right? And you're not really testing your character there. You're kind of testing their ability to perform under pressure, but you're mostly just testing the role of all the unmeasurables, the things like, the circumstance that you're in, and like the opportunities presented in the moment, which is below the fidelity of the mechanics generally. The role of like luck and fate, like that's what the d20 roll is, right? It's all that stuff that isn't controlled by your character perfectly, kind of culminating in this really big spread between 1 and 20. Like that's a massive spread for a single die. So it really it really puts a lot of weight into the role of fate and luck, especially if you push it in early levels. And older editions of D&D, you were expected to describe what you were doing in a way that kind of avoided the die, because the role of fate could be so punitive, right? And then as you got more hit points, which is the major thing you gained between levels in old editions, was hit points, or if you were a wizard, you would get spells. Again, you could make bigger risks because you could simply tank more hits. or you could hit them harder with more powerful magic. So old school D&D, the first couple of levels are like tutorial levels. You only have a couple of hits, and they're like Dark Souls hard, right? And they teach you that if you rely on I will roll the die again and again, it's going to fail you and you're going to die. And so you're taught to avoid it and play cleverly. And this is pretty explicit in the older texts. And then as you become more powerful, you can rely on it more because your base attack is higher, your Thaco back in the day, or Thaco I think is how it's actually pronounced. So that's an interesting way of looking at like what the die represents. And then when you contrast that with World of Darkness dice, World of Darkness is a build system. It's a very simple and approachable build system, but it's a build system where you have two stats that combine classically. And there was a lot of variance in this in older editions, like in the first edition of Vampire. There's a lot more variance in this, but in general, like over the years it's existed, the way it works is you combine an attribute and the number of dots in the attribute with a number of dots in a skill that corresponds to the type of action that you want to take, right? And then you roll that as a pool of d10s and you select out ones that are a certain number higher, target number higher. And I think that it generally was around 6 or 7. So somewhere north of 50% of the dice got chucked. Usually you only had like, I think it was 30 or 40%, by whatever the number that is, you would keep as successes. And then the number of successes that you got would determine how capable you were at something. And there were still a few diceless things, like, I don't know if this was part of the core World of Darkness experience, but I remember Exalted had a version of this system, and you could just combine dicelessly your strength plus athletics to get your general lifting strength, like how much you could just lift without having to roll anything. And I thought that was pretty nifty. That was pretty keen, right? So the question that I had, though, and I was asking this myself today, is what were the dice, if they're not the roll of fate, because you buy attributes and you buy skills, like what is the role of the dice? What are they representing? And because of the way that success happens in World of Darkness, and because of your access to like the discrete units of success, which is to say rolling high enough on a d10 are based on your combination of innate ability and trained skill, you're kind of purchasing these discrete chunks of chance towards that success. And it's always chance, right? There's never a time when your dice just immediately give you a floor. You can just roll nothing or botch just at any given roll. That's really unlikely. Like the odds aren't with that, but you can do that. And so conceptually, you have to. That means that the game is making a statement about how a human being's innate attributes and skills function under duress. Because again, you're not really rolling those dice except whenever you don't know what the outcome is, like when it's not a foregone conclusion. That understanding is still kind of kept over from Dungeons and Dragons. So when you're not playing it kind of as a diceless game, just a descriptive game, whenever you actually have to access that, those are moments when you could fail, or moments when there's a lot of like stress and duress, like combat, or a chase sequence or something like that. It's pretty uncommon to roll the dice unless it's approaching a life and death situation or something with a lot of danger or a lot of risk. So the game is making the statement that under duress, our access to skills gives us multiple discrete chances of like delving into the capacity to succeed at something. That's really interesting to me. And actually, I liked that realization so much, I'm going to replicate a version of that with this. So currently, instead of being diceless, what we're doing here, and this is the older version, instead of being diceless, I'm making something like the effect charts in Lone Wolf Fist. And as you'll recall, those gave you sort of tiers of what you could describe yourself as doing if you got a certain level of effect. So this is going to be a pickup dice equal to, I'm going to do like a ranks and skill things. I'm going to keep the initial bid, and it's going to be 1 to 100, or 0 to 100 rather, and then every discrete full 10 gives you a die when you roll it, and then the skills go from 1 to 5. And again, those are just dice that you're getting. And so in certain circumstances in this game, your attribute is going to kind of carry you, and the skills are just a extension of the attributes. So when I do the effect charts, I'm going to have 4, and they're each going to have a prong for all of the skills. So like ferocity, which is kind of like the animal strength and battle uh, skill, it's gonna have one for each of these. You fighting with your bare hands, uses of power for musculature, and then endurance for like resisting things, not dying, that sort of thing. Lovers of Lone Wolf Fist are going to recognize this design. Like I've already done this once, right? And so that's what I'm currently working on is like the tiers of effect that you can have. Human beings are going to be on the same scale with the monsters, and the monsters are way more powerful. So I'm kind of curbing along human beings. In Lone Wolf Fist, I curved it along the superhuman powers of the Lone Wolf Fist, and I kind of got the normal humans out of the way and kept them to the very lowest tier, one die, rank one. Like that's where a human is. And in this, I want a little more variance in the human antagonists and NPCs you can encounter. So I'm curbing it along the humans, and then the higher parts, like the mid to high parts, are going to be where monsters generally dwell. And they can play the game kind of dicelessly. Like they can play it more like out of their raw attributes. So you can just kind of naturally do stuff that a human has to take a chance to do. So humans are going to face this as pools of D10s generally, and their diceless stuff is going to be very weak. So they act like a human in most circumstances, and in extraordinary circumstances, they can reach in and potentially get deeper. And monsters are going to be a very high base level, so they can just do things that are unbelievably cool. Because they're monsters, right? They're werewolves and vampires and such. And then if they have to touch dice, it's to get to these insane levels of capacity, or it's to kind of generate resources they can spend in combat. So I'm making the effects charts right now. I'm sort of conceptualizing those. And I'm realizing that I need to keep humans in that 1 to 5 range. I think that's enough for them, enough real estate in the game, and put 6 to 10 as the monster range. Because I was doing speed, which is one of these attributes, and I was realizing that the variance in human running speed was really, really mild. Like the fastest human ever is Usain Bolt, who was 27 and some change miles an hour, and the average running speed is like 16 to 17 miles an hour. So that means between what was around the 3 or 4 mark on the effect chart and the 10, it's 17 through 20 says 10 points of miles per hour with spread out amongst like the majority of the chart, and that's such a low fidelity that you just don't feel its impact in the game at all. So yeah, I'm gonna squish the humans down to 1-5, and then the monsters are gonna be 6-10. And this also lets me do fun stuff like bring in the animal kingdom and say, now you're as fast as a rhino, now you're as fast as cheetah, now you're as fast as a peregrine falcon. Like you can. I do the trick I did in Lone Wolf Fist, where the higher tiers are exponential, which is about how it works in the animal kingdom too. So that's really fun. You're not going to get to quite the levels of capacity in this that you would get in Lone Wolf Fist, because this is not a game about throwing mountains. It's a game about basically being a vampire or a monster in the modern world. But yeah, so that's where I'm at with that. And as far as combat goes, I want to do something kind of similar to Lone Wolf Fist, where you have a pool of dice and you roll them, and instead of pairing them off, what I want to do is if you roll X number or higher, like 6 or higher, or whatever number or higher, those are like a pool of actions you get to take, and you can either focus them for single large actions or split them up into smaller actions. And so you can have a scenario where like you have like a mixed pile of opponents, like a really dangerous one and a couple of goons, and if you roll really well, you could dispatch both the goons and then do like a weaker attack on the main guy. Or if it's just you and him, you can take all those successes that you were having to spread around to those other NPCs, and then just focus on him and just really wail on him. And I think that'll really kind of make combat feel interesting and varied, so that you have these kind of different. First of all, you're able to make decisions in combat that aren't just I roll my dice, do I hit or not? Like that's not much of a decision, right? That's the first thing. And the second thing is I want to be able to like flow between the different kind of states of combat, like between sneaking around and hunting someone and then just getting into like a vicious hand-to-hand conflict, or like trying to turn it into a social conflict. Like all of that stuff would be really interesting, right? And being able to kind of like struggle between those different types of combat for different adversaries that have different like strengths and weaknesses would be really interesting. So I'm currently working on that system. My co-author is doing the really broad stuff, like the game structure stuff. Like there's a real important diurnal, like nocturnal cycle to this game, because again, it's kind of about vampires, right? And so he's working on that stuff currently, and it's coming. It's making some really interesting stuff, and all the like big scale projects you can do as like a Emperor of the Night. So that's what I'm working on currently. I just wanted to get on here and talk about it for a minute because I'm excited, and it's good to get to this early stage of design again. I'm a real experimental kind of guy, and my co-author is a much more of a refiner. Like he takes an excellent idea and sort of winnows it down to a more perfect form. And it's really important to have all of that energy. I'm not much of a refiner personally. I'll refine a little bit and then I'll just get bored with it and I'll be like, okay, I'm done with this. And I'll want something novel to take my interest. So yeah, that's I'm at the 15-minute mark. This has actually been pretty good. I'm gonna leave it here. But yes, look forward to some playtestable drafts of this in the not too distant future, and look forward to more Acid and Steel. I've only got one more lore to finish up, and then I'm going to start writing the Steel half, all the cool robot stuff. I'm currently absorbing some media to get me all excited about that. It's going to be a pretty significant rehash of the writing there. So I'll make another video about that in the not too distant future. But get ready, true believers. There's going to be some really cool stuff coming down the pike. All right, peace.